As Tiny Tim observed, "God bless us, everyone." Out into the darkness, hiking single file. The young men worked their way slowly in the light of the moon-soaked, snowy clearing. The yearly trek took them towards the forest, their path going further into the dead of the winter wilderness. Under the shelter of snow-covered roofs, their families and friends far behind were lighting candles and making a start on preparing a feast. As well as the many candles, a great bonfire was lit. This was not only to push back against the dark of the season, but to encourage great Odin to bring back the sun from its hiding place. The boys would return, they assured themselves. When they did, they would have chosen the great log that they knew was blessed with the magic of the gods. The mighty log of Yuletide would not fit in a fireplace, but it would burn slow through the entire celebration, the great feast that brought everyone together in an embrace of warmth, to push back against the deadly cold and evil spirits that likely wandered nearby. This is just one image of the time of year we now call Christmas, before it involved all the modern trappings of the season, including the becoming partly or dominantly, depending on your views, a Christian holiday. I want to, much as I did with the blog post about basic income and Thanksgiving, mention that this is also not a neutral subject for everyone. Christmas was a celebration of the dominant colonizing force that swept the world, especially the Americas. But when you consider its history, non-Christian prehistories, and how it is celebrated by theists and atheists alike, and all points in between, I would like to use this little quote by writers Carl and Alice Count from their book 4,000 Years of Christmas. A festival that remodels itself at every step to suit the people for whom it settles. This is because of its time of year, which makes it unique to every other holiday, save perhaps New Year's Eve/New Year's Day. Hogmanay in Scotland was, in part, an attempt to move the secular part of celebration to a different entire date. Whether societies knew about the concept of solstice or not, the shortest day of sunlight for the year, after which the days would get longer, there was one common theme. That was the cold, dark bleakness of winter. Indeed, the Germanic and Scandinavian peoples that inspired the scene that starts off this blog, as well as the Mesopotamians with their deity Marduk, and the Romans who worshipped the god of abundance Saturn with Saturnalia, all placed their grand feasts and festivals around this same time, for the same reason of physical and an almost psychological survival. For instance, the northern people who we started with, their festivities were a 2-month blowout because, with apologies to any vegans reading, it cost less to just slaughter than to try to keep all the livestock fed through the winter. By doing this, around this same late November to early January, with everyone bringing what they could, the birth of gift exchange, and decorating the halls with what never ceased to look alive, such as evergreens, holly, ivy, as well as light and fire, they drove back the tentacles of winter that would try to reach them. It also, in every society, was like a midwinter shot in the arm, a blast of brightness and hope that meant that once it was done, you were halfway or over halfway home to the coming spring. Getting there after such a wonderful time with friends and family made those next 2 months or so not appear so daunting. Closer to home, indigenous cultures in North America would see it as a time of reflection and taking care of family, quieting down as nature quiets down to take care of the spirit of each person and prepare for the long months ahead. In every culture, the midwinter brings out connectedness in a variety of forms. The season pushed us into a corner, causing us to decide that all must do better than just survive for the good of all. Indeed, this idea of being equal in the time of winter would lead eventually to the Mummers and the English Lord of Misrule events, where slaves and masters of all forms would change place, and people would demand food and drink, with the upper classes, who more often than not were actually happy to oblige. This took place in multiple different locations and across time, from the streets of Mesopotamian cities to the new growing Dutch community in the new world that would be named New York City. In consideration of this, I am reminded of the writings by Rutger Bregman in his book Humankind. As he explained, When things get difficult, we do not turn on each other so much as become more convivial and helpful. Our rise to dominance wasn't survival of the fittest, but survival of the friendliest. Years after the Roman Empire made Christianity its core belief, the idea of a holiday replacing the birth of the sun, Saturnalia, with the birth of the Son, Jesus, was not that complicated. Rather than trying to change everything, the ideas and traditions were simply co-opted over to the new Christian celebration of Christmas. 4 centuries later, a Turkish bishop would add another part to the story. He became a legend for his generosity, and the tale of him that grew to the following. He knew of 3 daughters of a poor man who could not afford a dowry. So he snuck to the house and flung 3 bags of gold into the chimney. The girls hung their wet stockings by the fire, and into those the coins fell. Eventually, the bishop would be canonized as a name we still use during the holiday, Saint Nicholas. His story in legend would develop for centuries as the embodiment of generosity of the season. Another religious man and educator in New York in 1823 would take the legend closer by leaps and bounds, writing an account of a visit by Saint Nicholas. The writer originally stayed anonymous because over the last few centuries, the Protestant churches, especially the Puritans who had outright banned the raucous event in the 17th century under Oliver Cromwell, had very different views about what should happen on Christmas Day. So as such, he set the event on Christmas Eve and made it more about the children and family. The poem about the jolly old elf and his 8 reindeer would become better known as "'T was the night before Christmas." This began a new assessment of festivities that have been banned, reprieved, had stayed underground, and lives with us still despite its complications. Christmas is still like it has always been, a complex moment of contradictions. It is both sacred and secular. It can be seen as the holy night, but it also still beats with the strong heart Saturnalia, Yuletide, with drinking and dancing, with gifts and food, fire and light. Like Washington Irving wrote in the 1906 work, Christmas at Bracebridge Hall. There is something in the season of the year that gives a charm to the festivity of Christmas and makes us more keenly disposed for the pleasure of the social circle. Our thoughts are more concentrated, our friendly sympathies more aroused. I feel the influence of the season beaming into my soul from the happy looks of those around me. Surely happiness is reflective like the light of heaven, and every countenance bright with smiles and glowing with innocent enjoyment is a mirror transmitting to others the rays of a supreme and ever-shining benevolence. He who can turn churlishly away from contemplating the felicity of his fellow beings, and can sit down darkling and repining in his loneliness when all around is joyful, may have his moments of strong excitement and selfish gratification, but he wants for the genial and social sympathies which constitute the charm of a merry Christmas. I would never suppose that, like the Thanksgiving blog, that this will be a direct argument for basic income. It would be wonderful if I could say I had found some pamphlet written by Charles Dickens saying he had been in conversation with the Belgian writer Joseph Charlier, and he really liked his idea of a citizen's income. There is nothing I have found that goes as direct as this or that some other element refers directly to it. But that said, there are moments in what I have sifted through that speak to how this season of goodwill to all only reinforces the reason for a basic income. One period of history that I have referenced many times before is the introduction of the Victorian Poor Laws of 1834, a result of the beginnings of industrialization and the time of enclosures from the commons. Into this steps a friend and ally we have just mentioned to help light our way in this darkness. In his own words, "It is a time of year when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. Dash the men from the local charity come to request a donation of Mr. Ebenezer Scrooge." In the same year as those Victorian poor laws would separate the destitute, indeed tearing apart families, with the callous distinctions poor and undeserving poor, sending these innocent souls onto the cruel wheels of prisons and workhouses, both creations of the time, Charles Dickens had many places of inspiration to draw from. He himself had been orphaned years before, at the age of 12, placing him in his first employment at a blacking workhouse, making bottles of shoe polish. This experience, and seeing other abandoned children, along with a later visit to the Field Lane Ragged School for the poor children seen as too unsightly for Sunday school, pushed him to want to right the wrongs in a way that did not alienate any potential audience of readers. While again, an income floor is not specifically referenced in this Christmas card to the universal basic income movement, there are things upon which we can take pause. On return from the Ragged School, Dickens threw himself into the writing that would become one of his best-loved works, A Christmas Carol. The book was written as a pushback on the attitudes on the subject, especially child poverty. Scrooge is, like Marley explains to him, was as well, the paradigm of relentless self-interest, following Thomas Malthus's idea of a surplus population, thinking the programs of the day will suffice, and believing what he first said when he met Marley as a young clerk, the world is a hard and cruel place. One must steel oneself to survive it, not be crushed with the weak and the infirm. Indeed, one anonymous critique of the story from the Westminster Review could have been just as easily lifted from Twitter last week. Who went without turkey and punch in order that Bob Cratchit might get them for, unless there were turkey and punch in surplus, someone must go without. The ideology of life being a zero-sum game, and a game of winner-take-all scarcity, is hardly a new one that we have worked hard to deconstruct, my friends. But our guide to 1834 gives us some aid, with a ghost of Christmas present that may have also been inspired by the writings of Clement Moore's Jolly Old Elf, just 2 decades before. The spirit whom Ebenezer encounters was a grand, robust gentleman with a beard, a gentle expression and hearty voice and laugh. He also surrounded with a very clear reference to the world's incredible abundance. In Dickens' own words, it was his own room. But it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney as that dull petrifaction of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time, or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped up on the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12th cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. In easy state upon this couch sat a jolly giant glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in a shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping around the door. It reminds me a little of the abundance of the season, referenced in the Irish Clancy Brothers song, Christmas in Carrick. Home then to the laden table, ham and goose and pints of beer, whiskey handed around in tumblers. Christmas comes but once a year. Puddings made with egg and treacle, seeded raisins and brown suet, sated breadcrumbs and mixed spices, grated rind and plenty fruit, cinnamon, ginger, cloves and nutmeg, porter, brandy and old ale. Don't forget the wine and whiskey. Christmas comes but once a year. Both works give a clear indication that, like Mahatma Gandhi would say a few years before the Clancy Brothers song was written, the world has enough for everyone's needs, but not for everyone's greed. To slightly contradict the Irish song, though, and with all due respect, the spirit of Christmas present would then say something to Scrooge that speaks to what 260s American pop artists would say about this season of goodwill, comfort, and joy in defiance of uncertainties. Why not have Christmas at least once a week? Paul and Paula's song, Christmas the Happy Holiday. Or in the Spirit's words to Ebenezer Scrooge, Mortal, we spirits of Christmas do not live only one day of our year. We live all 365. So is it true of the child born in Bethlehem. He does not live in men's hearts only one day of the year, but in all. Ghost of Christmas present. Whether you are Christian or not, religious or not, one can focus in on what the child in the manger represents. Not only the birth of the church, but a yearly reminder that the person we should look to, who we should try to walk in the path of, even if we are, as John the Baptist would say, unworthy to do, he represents a yearly reminder of what he symbolizes. He symbolizes forgiveness, peace, and love unconditionally. This is what we were to emulate, brought here in a time where we come together in family, in friendship, in community. This, of course, leads to a criticism of basic income that some might think applies at Christmas, specifically with gift-giving and the subject of reciprocity. Anthropologist Marshall Salins defines reciprocity in 3 variations: generalized, balanced, and negative. Generalized is giving without immediate expectation of return. This is like what David Graeber explained in both Debt the First 5,000 Years and his final work with friend and co-writer David Wengrow, The Dawn of Everything, that rather than direct barter, our early societies were this style of gift economy. You would praise a neighbor's horse, and he would say, "Oh, do you want that one? Go ahead, please take that one. I have enough." It was said with total sincerity, and even though it was free, there was a natural expectation that he could do the same with you. Not that you would have to do that with anything, but if there was something he wanted, and you did not need, then you would help out. Negative is essentially taking advantage, setting up a situation so you come out ahead. Balanced is where the question can arise, as it is the expectation of something at the same time for an equal amount. The thing with this, of course, is that it would be pretty weird if you absolutely demanded every person that you gave a gift to had to give you back the exact monetary level of gift in return. Especially when you consider that, especially since it was the night before Christmas, the focus of the season would turn to the children. The children are unlikely to be able to return the same economic value that is bestowed upon them. With anyone else, it would feel like some weird Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory moment, or just so transactional and awkward that you may not, for some strange reason, run into that person the next Christmas. Philippe Van Parijs and Yannick van der Boort push back on the subject of reciprocity and free riders generally in their 2017 book Basic Income, a radical proposal for a free society and a sane economy. Firstly, we stigmatize inactivity, and in this case, the gift-buying potential of low-income persons over high-income persons. This is my own thought on this at Christmas, but you then, if you were acting like Dr. Cooper and making an issue of present buying, reciprocity, and amounts, you would have to also consider the percentage of a person's earnings in regard to the gift. A person on income assistance buying you a teddy bear is using a far greater percentage of available funds than Jeff Bezos buying you the same teddy bear. Do you really want to start the unwrapping with a demand of seeing each friend and family member's last pay stubs? Yeah, that would be pretty horrid and insane. By now, it should also feel like this is not in complete sync with everything about the togetherness and community of the season I have described. If anyone did this, and hey, I could be wrong, but their next few holidays might be quiet. When compared with BI, one thing we have seen is that people want to work not only to improve their own lives, but to get more involved in the community when they are invested in with that upfront layer of trust. I mentioned this in a previous blog titled Tragedy of Trust, on how the Finland experiment showed an increase in trust in the community, government, and a desire to get involved in voting. Like United States disability advocate who goes by the name Unelim, Genre of Stubby said, "When you are given, you want to give back." So if anything, the kind of reciprocity in Christmas is generalized, not the balanced one, with all the impossible scrutiny it would contain and the transactional feeling it would create. Not only this, but a gift to someone who cannot reimburse to the same may help them, which might put them on a stronger foothold where they can give from a stronger place in future. Again, it would be a bit awkward and odd to approach it this way, but it is the very nature of raising kids. You help them develop into people who can interact with the whole world, not just yourself, which is better for everyone. themselves included. Same goes with a basic income. This kind of unconditional support has been shown to grow families healthier, stronger, with better dynamics, school performance, moving from unemployment to being employed, from part-time to full-time. The lists go on. There are Christmas-specific stories as well from recent pilots. From the Lindsay Advocate article in 2018, despite the Ontario Basic Income pilot's cancellation, one young mother was able to take her son to special events of the season. She was able to actually buy him gifts herself, spoil him a little and pay bills. Another mother, Samantha, said something similar, adding how she could take him bowling, which was his favorite thing. Another gentleman, Doug, was able to buy gifts for his mother and take her to dinner for Christmas, which he never before could do. Security guard Tim Button was able to make plans to visit family at Christmas, something he had not been able to do for years. Kathy, who fell into poverty because of a work-related injury and loss of her spouse, was able to buy gifts for her 4 grandchildren and could afford ingredients for Christmas baking. Also, with increasing technology which has increased production, while the gains have not gone to the people, we can allow for more leisure as work is better allocated. Unlike means-tested benefits, it better enables work. Some cannot work in the commercial sense as easily as others, such as persons with disabilities who also have more expenses than others. But the last story about Kathy not only speaks to that, but in regards to the baking, which I am sure was only one part of Christmas preparations, there is also the work that even our first story speaks to, the work of care. Christmas is almost entirely care work, invested into upfront, which is exactly how work begins to start with. This is an argument for basic income by itself, as explained by the late Gertz Werner in what Scott Santens calls the toothpaste argument for basic income. There is decorating, shopping, organizing, event planning, cleaning, cooking, baking, childcare, gift wrapping, tree trimming, dishes, and a variety of other forms of non-paid vital work that is ramped up more than ever to make the holiday the best it can be. If supporting the work of care is a classic argument, then Christmas only impressively expands on this. There is also the classic improvements over the poverty and precarity traps of welfare. It gives the power to say yes to a better job that can help fund the holidays, the power to say no to both bad jobs and being stuck in any other kind of bad place over the holiday, and the ability to switch work more easily if disruption appears. This disruption can be anything life throws at you during this season, when it is cold outside, and you want the holiday to work out, such as automation of a job, a weather-related event, or any kind of thing that could demand that you have to somehow change horses midstream. Continuing with applying some of these classic arguments for a basic income to the holiday season, there is the one that I mentioned about Thanksgiving, how the work we do comes from generations before. Christmas is hardly the same simple log fire and feast it was back thousands of years ago. Our generations of Christmases past have built the holiday up to a rich, multi-layered event of the secular and sacred, of the Grinch, proving how the spirit of the season is more important than the commercial side, and that same theme set to the iconic soundtrack of the Vince Guaraldi trio of A Charlie Brown Christmas. To keep these incredible ideas flowing, which could come from any member of our community, the only way to ensure everyone can pursue their ideas is to ensure they are not blocked by poverty. The worst example right now of this is the subject of medical assistance in dying, or medical assistance in dying, that has been put in the path of 1.5 million impoverished, disabled Canadians who cannot afford to live with dignity, as of this writing. Can you imagine what Dickens, the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future, Ebenezer on Christmas morning, or even our ancient Norsemen would have to say about leaving our most vulnerable citizens behind like this? Like Thomas Paine taught us on the subject of poverty and charity, there are, in every country, some magnificent charities established by individuals. It is, however, but little that any individual can do when the whole extent of the misery to be relieved is considered. He may satisfy his conscience, but not his heart. He may give all that he has, and that all will relieve but little. It is only by organizing civilization upon such principles as to act like a system of pulleys that the whole weight of misery can be removed. Thomas Paine, Agrarian Justice, 1797. That said, we can continue to walk and chew gum at the same time when facing the immediacy of poverty. There are people who need help now, so while we push, argue for, and explain how those ropes and pulleys are necessary, we can try to help where we are, what we can, with what we have. Local charities that work directly, helping people directly. There is lots of persons in the Persons with Disabilities community on Twitter who you can support. Follow accounts like at PWD Allies. Have to leave a space before the name, as WordPress thinks I'm trying to tag someone on here and gets perplexed. At Patricia FLSD, at ODSP Poverty, at Dark Penguin EFB, and at Weatherman2709. They may need help, and they can direct you to the larger community, who also does. On a larger scale, there are things like Give Directly, who literally send out basic incomes to places overseas and in the United States. Their earlier work in places like Kenya was documented in Annie Lowry's book, Give People Money. If you are based here in Victoria, consider sending a message to either at @SelfGovernForUs, at the Backpack Pro 1, or at Beacon Hill Folks about donations. This way, and others that may be similar where you are connected, there is less chance of red tape, middlemen, or other stuff that will get between your kind action and the people who need the help. If you are like so many who have nothing to give, it is fine. Like Guy, Standing said, of so many, we feel like one mistake, one accident, or one illness, and we could fall through one of those cracks ourselves. It is how too many Canadians feel like they are one paycheck away from being in financial trouble. It is a reason to raise the floor itself. But if you can't help financially, learn about the subject of basic income and share what inspires you with friends, family, on networks, and with your elected representatives. I know that sounds small, but it is by sharing the truth about the power of this idea that the confusion fades away, and to quote Professor F.A.Q, standing again, we can give our politicians stronger backbones about the idea. Whatever happens, and whatever you decide, I want to thank you for reading, and wish you and yours the best of the holiday season, a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and all the best in the coming year. Thank you for reading. Tom Pogson.